Hi, friends. Welcome to the Do Life podcast. I'm your host, Life Coach Layla, and today we have a very special guest, Sari Cowsert. Did I say that
Amazing.
properly? Okay.
Yes.
She is a certified hypnotherapist, a meditation facilitator, a coach, and just an amazing human all around. So, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I met Sari through a podcast group that we were both in, and we learned a lot of information and figured out that we have very similar podcasts. So she is the host of the Uncharted Way podcast. You can find it available anywhere that you watch podcasts. And she's also a self-help, growth-oriented podcast host. So, Sari, what made you want to get into podcasting and to take this direction with your life?
Yeah. Well, I think to begin with, we all have a story, and we've all gotten there in some form or fashion. Usually there's some sort of trigger that jumpstarts our growth journey of some sort. And so really, everybody has some form of the hero journey, and it looks different for everybody. And if you've grown up in America, like I have, we're fed this cookie cutter American dream life that we're supposed to live. And to be honest, for me, I was struggling to live up to that idea, and it was stressful, and it was causing all sorts of havoc in my body, in my mind. And I had to go on a journey of radical self-exploration and to advocate for myself in the health and wellness field because I felt like my doctors weren't doing it, or counselors or therapists. So, yeah, I have my own story, and ideally, I wanted to create a platform for people that could share their story because it all looks different. And in the hopes that maybe somebody will get some sort of amazing golden nugget that will inspire them to do something different and to actually take back their life and live fully from it.
I think there's some really key golden nuggets in that statement that you just had. And one of it is you had to learn to advocate for yourself with your own physical, mental health, because in America, it's not so prevalent to have the care and proper diagnosis. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what happened with your situation?
Yeah. So I think primarily, starting with we are in a medical system primarily, and I can speak to this. My husband is an ER nurse. He works in the heart of like the Western medical field, being in the hospital. And I'm sure this might piss people some off when they hear this, but a lot of our doctors and medical businesses, it's kind of like Doc in a box, right? Like we're basically a vending machine in a way where we're going in and we're getting looked at, and maybe they're handing you a prescription or something to help yourself. But in reality, it's just Band-Aids that are covering things up. Because if they actually spent time with you to find out the root of why these symptoms are presenting themselves, I probably wouldn't have had to advocate for myself. So that was the biggest piece. But in reality, it just started from I was ill with chronic anxiety and panic attacks. And this started from, I can remember being even 12, 13 years old. And I was raised Jewish, and I was getting ready for my bat mitzvah. And I remember having panic attacks and my mom giving me like a brown paper bag and breathing in it. And that was, I think, the first panic attack that I experienced, that happened through that time, but that was that stressful time. And my mother, God love her, didn't have the language or the knowing to really how to support me in that. And so I think that's just kind of where it started of I'm alone and I have to deal with this on my own. And later in life, in my early 20s, it started progressing even more to where this fear and worry, I was very, very connected to my body. My body was very loud in what it signaled to me, but not really understanding that those were actually messages at the time. It just turned me into a hypochondriac, to be honest. And I would go to these doctors and tell them these things are happening. And they would just tell me, oh, you're fine, or write me a prescription. And again, it was just helping the symptoms, not really the key points. So throughout my 20s, this anxiety and this fear of being sick or something being wrong with me. And when you have anxiety, so for some people it's very physical in their body, and some people anxiety is very mental. For me, because I was so hyper aware of my body, it was very physical. So anytime a panic attack would come on, I'd feel my heart start to flutter or maybe palpitate or race. And then I would think, okay, there's something wrong with my heart. Or then my breathing would start to get really heavy. Then my hands would get clammy and I would have a pain randomly somewhere in my body. I would just think worst case scenario. So this started in my early 20s. And I can remember too, at the time, I was obsessed with my body and how it needed to look. So I was working out like crazy. I was drinking Red Bull like a crackhead, probably taking some sort of a methamphetamine, whether that was like ephedrine or hydroxycut or something that was like back in the day. And also like smoking cigarettes and doing these all in tandem and wondering why my heart was racing. And this is just like the thing we're fed. That's normal. I can only imagine how many women probably out there relate to that story. I was having these panic attacks and wondering why. And they just started getting more and more progressively intense throughout my 20s. And at some point, I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism. So then I can remember even asking the doctor, I have to take this pill for the rest of my life. And he's like, yeah. And that was the only answer. And then I ended up having my first daughter, went through hormonal shifts of depression, anxiety on top of that, and ended up being diagnosed with PCOS because I was struggling to have my next daughter. There was a point to where I actually didn't have a period for over 9 months. And to me, that's a red alert system that something's not going right in your body. So I was really frustrated because I was like, here we are with another diagnosis. And although maybe having two diagnoses for some people doesn't seem like a big deal, like I know some people have high blood pressure or things like this. But to me, that was like, I want to be overall healthy. I want to be thriving in life. And here I am getting another fucking diagnosis. Can I cuss on here? Is that okay?
Yeah, you're fine. Especially when it's relevant. Like that's so frustrating. I would be worried if you weren't cussing.
It was very frustrating. And then again, to go back to my wonderful husband who's working in the ER. And my anxiety was so bad that I would have sometimes upwards of 10, 12 panic attacks a day and couldn't even physically get in the car to take my children to school. And I just felt so lost. And my husband would come home and say, but you're healthy. Sari." And there's such a disconnect of the physical wellness and the mental wellness, I think, in the medical world. And, he treats people all day that are having heart attacks and strokes and car accidents and things like this. And so for him, me having a panic attack was like, you're fine. And that's how they treat us in the hospital or doctor's office as well, too. And so it got to this point to where I literally felt so out of control. What I wanted was to be in control, and I didn't know how to find that. And at the time, unfortunately, I didn't see any counselors or therapists that were actually helping me. So I would see them for a couple sessions and then bail because they just wanted to talk about my problems. They didn't want to give me any specific tools to actually deal with what I was going through. And most people, if you haven't actually had a panic attack, people don't really know what you're experiencing.
I've never had one, but my husband and all of my children have them. Not regularly, but frequently enough that, when we talk about them and they explain them to me, I'm like, oh, it's like you're excited for something. And they're like, no, it feels like you're dying.
Mm,
So yeah, it's such a crazy concept, and it doesn't seem like it's as serious to someone who's never had one or someone who's just watching someone. It's like, you're fine, stop, what's wrong with you? But when you're actively having one, it is life or death in your brain.
yeah,
So
it feels very scary. And when you add the being a hypochondriac on top of that, and you truly feel like this could be the time that your heart is failing you. And then to add now that I had children at this point, that it wasn't just about me, it was about them. And if I'm driving in this car right now and I have a panic attack and my heart stops, who's going to take care of my children? So it was a whole nother layer of added stress and anxiety. Yeah, I think that when you're in this vicious cycle of anxiety, of worry, of fear, of what if, there truly is a cycle and a spiral happening. And no one could explain this to me. And what started actually on my trajectory of healing a little bit was actually having this PCOS diagnosed. I remember at the time my OB-GYN wanted to put me on metformin, which is a prescription that's you can use for PCOS. And it wasn't really helping me. And so I just kind of got to this point to where I was like, there's got to be some information out there that's better than this. And that's when I started really becoming the researcher of my life. And even with my hypothyroidism, I was taking synthetic medication for it. And I would go see my endocrinologist, and my tests would be perfect, but I still felt like shit. And that didn't bother them, which again is just like, what the fuck are we giving our power away to if that's the answer?
right, your labs are fine, so you're fine.
Right. And that's happening every day with patients.
And I think it's so important, you mentioned something very briefly, and I want to bring some awareness to it. I think it's really important that I know not everybody is as in tune with their bodies as would be ideal, but your body sends little distress signals. And when you are in tune, you notice those little distress signals. And it seems like most people don't listen to their body's signals until it until it becomes an emergency, like it's an SOS signal. So the little distress signals get ignored. The doctors don't care about the little distress signals. Most people don't even notice the little distress signals that your body sends out with something's misaligned. And it's not until it becomes a disaster or an emergency situation that people are listening to it. Because I know,
Right.
I also have PCOS, and there were definite signs and telltale symptoms and things that were something's wrong. Again, being an early 20-year-old, you just kind of ignore it like, oh, it's fine. I didn't get enough sleep last night, or, I'm a little stressed about the situation. But I think deep down, like your body's trying to tell you something. And it's really frustrating to those who are in tune with their body and they do take this symptoms and distress signals seriously. And you go to a doctor and you say, hey, something's wrong. And they run one test and say, oh, that test came back, you're fine. So frustrating. So
Yeah.
how did you overcome this situation and this type of dismissive healing?
Right. And so again, this just exacerbating my anxiety continuously of seeking answers and unable to find them with the people of authority in their field. So there was a book that I read. I think it was either called or by this woman called the PCOS Diva. And what I learned in this book was that when you have PCOS, you're usually insulin resistant. And when you're insulin resistant, that means that you typically have blood sugar issues. And this was a huge finding for me because what happens when your blood sugar drops? You're usually irritable, you're shaky, right? So maybe you feel dizzy or you feel like tired or just not yourself. Those symptoms are usually what started my panic attacks. And so there was a diet protocol that I did in this book. And I think within about 3 or 4 weeks, I would say that my anxiety was probably cut in half. Just because I was a hairstylist for 17 years. And when you're grinding out client after client and you're not making time to eat well and all of these things, we'd have pizza and chips and cookies in our break room. And I'd go eat that and then wonder why an hour later my blood sugar had dropped and I was feeling like shit and it was about time to go home and I was going to have a panic attack getting in the car. Yeah, and also this is distraction, right? Like being at work was actually good for me because I wasn't really present with my thoughts. I was with a client and I was in conversation the whole time. Well, then the minute I stopped, got in the car, and all of a sudden I was alone with myself and my anxiety was like, well, it's right on time. Time to have a panic attack. Yes.
Which then aids to the thought process of every time you get in a car, you're going to have a panic attack. You can't drive the kids. So it's a whole snowball effect.
Yeah. And so I started listening to podcasts and books on self-help. I didn't even really know that this was a category of any sort of thing at the time because I had given such blind faith to the medical world because that's all I knew. And think of how many people that truly is all they know. And I'm not saying that there aren't some amazing doctors out there that are actually doing things differently. It's just not what I encountered in my journey. So I started really looking into holistic health. And that was really starting to tie in the mind body connection. And what I learned through Dr. Joe Dispenza was one of my biggest teachers. And I read his book called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And what I understood in his teachings was that I used to think that my panic attacks just kind of came out of nowhere and that I truly wasn't in control of my own anxiety of my own conscious thoughts. But what I learned is that the subconscious mind, which is what I love to work with now with people in hypnosis, because I truly understand what it takes to rewire a version of yourself to become someone else, is that it's kind of like driving your car on autopilot. How many of us have driven our car to a destination and we didn't really know how we got there? We were maybe in thought the whole time. Maybe we were singing to a song, just dazed, watching the scenery go by, but we got there because our body knows how to do that without us even thinking about it. And so, in that same way, my body knew how to have a panic attack without me even thinking about it. I had trained it to, just like we ride a bike and we don't have to think about it, even though we haven't done it in 17 years. We still
That's
know
such
how to
an
do it.
interesting concept. I would have never put two and two together. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Like you train your body to react certain ways to certain things.
Absolutely. But what was cool when I figured that out is if I could train it to have a panic attack, then I can actually untrain it back to my freedom. And that's what I learned. Those were the tools that I started being able to listen to. Was it takes about 90 to 120 seconds to get chemical emotions out of your body. So when you think of, like, let's just say, for instance, you have a fight with your partner and you're pissed and there's just endorphins, blood, chemicals just raging yourself through. And sometimes it's so hard to get out of that. And you're like, I need to go take a walk or something to get out of this. Well, taking that walk gives you that time to kind of calm down and get those chemical emotions out of your body. Because if you were to stay in that, you're just fueling it like the addiction. So, one of the great things that I learned was just utilizing my breath for 120 seconds anytime I started to recognize the thing that was happening. And it's just identifying the first trigger. And sometimes that first trigger was just me getting in the car and having to stop and say, okay, can we breathe? And then let's get going. And sometimes I would be in the car and I would have to do that 10 times over again. But it was just knowing that if I just start by this one step, something's going to change. And it didn't happen overnight, but it did happen. And that was every time that it didn't happen, I didn't go into a full blown panic attack, was a little piece of me getting my power back. And
Every victory is so important, especially when you're overcoming years. I had a similar conversation with my youngest child a week ago. They have had sleeping problems for as long as I can remember. I've also suffered from sleeping problems since I was 2 months old. And we've been trying new routines, new programs, and things to avoid long term medication. They were really frustrated with themselves because, after they did good for a week and then had friends over for the weekend, and then their schedule's all messed up again. And I was like, you did really good for a week. You have to praise yourself and give yourself credit when you do something. You can't expect an overnight change for something that you've spent the last 17 years with as a problem. Well, 1 week is amazing, but you're going to have setbacks. You're going to fall down. You have to keep getting back up. So I think it's so important to celebrate every small victory. When you don't have a panic attack, you celebrate that. You make sure that you tell yourself, like, look what we did, look what we can do, and keep that, and not just let it, oh, I'm never going to do this. It's not working. Like, it's not going to work overnight. It is something that you've spent years learning how to do. It might take an equal amount of years to learn how to undo, and to just be patient and have grace. I think a lot of people don't give themselves credit for the small wins. So I think that's really powerful that you were able to do that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And how lucky he is to have you as a mother to remind him of that.
Thank you.
because there's so many people out here doing this alone. And that was so much of what I experienced. And that also being a key factor of I thought that I had to have it all put together. No one in my life could know what I was experiencing. And I don't know if that was just my own conditioning or what people or maybe women or mothers think that like we have to look like we have it all together. I would say my husband, my sister, and maybe one friend were the only people that knew that this is something I dealt with on a daily basis. And this was like the polarity of life that I was living on a daily basis, which is so hard to like keep up the act. And this is so much of what I teach people now of like, we don't have to wear the mask. What's going to happen if you don't have your shit together? Is it you judging you? Is it other people judging you? What's the fear that if you crumble right now, you're already crumbling as it is, but we are just so taught that you have your shirt buttoned up tight, you live the perfect life, and you can't ever show. And that was my biggest thing when social media first started was, well, I'm seeing a beautiful white picket fence picture of this family, but I just had a conversation with her the other day and she's ready to leave her husband. And this is the world that we're living in every day. Talk about adding to the anxiety.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of societal pressure for not just women, but mothers and families and people, even men, to look like they have it all together and to not reach out for help and assistance when you need it. Genetically, we're designed to be a tribe and have community and be supported by other people. So this alienation of, nobody needs to know what goes on inside my four walls in my home, it's not normal for us on a cellular level. We need our community, we need our support. And there's so many of us that suffer in silence and suffer alone. And so many people don't have a partner or a spouse or a friend that they can turn to. And I think that's probably one of the reasons we both ended up doing, self-help podcasts was to share our information with people who don't have any other outlets or anybody to listen to. So
Yeah. And I think I went a complete 180. I went from living this very black and white life of presenting it one way and experiencing it another to now my vulnerability is my superpower. And I hope that it gives people permission that you can be vulnerable and still have it all. I mean, I dream, what would this world be like if that was permission that every single person had? So let's see. I think I got to a point to where another question that really just started catapulting this research in me and advocating for myself was asking myself this question of there has to be more in life than what I'm experiencing. And I always say the people that are willing to ask themselves that question are my people because we didn't come here to suffer. To me, that's not what Earth is about. Now, is there I always say the one analogy my husband gave me that is really great is when you talk about heart rate variability. So if you were to watch someone's heart rate on a screen going up and down and up and down, higher the peaks and the lower the valleys, the higher their heart rate variability is. And that's actually the healthier they are. If it's really small, if you were to actually zoom out, it would look like they're flatlining. And so we are supposed to have these really high highs in life and these really low lows and the in between. But the majority of it doesn't have to be suffering. And I can tell you for sure, the majority of my life for good 12 years was suffering. And it was all because I think needed to be something else. And so in hypnosis, when I work with people now, it's really about breaking down those cycles and the unconscious thoughts that slip by us without even thinking about it. I recently held a group hypnosis at an event, and we talked about playing small versus the big possibility of who you can be. And I think so many people settle for that small version, the voices in the back of their head. And I can remember when I first started meditating, and this is when I really started to reprogram myself. And a big thing was I was scared of death. Death scared the shit out of me, which is also probably why I was a hypochondriac. I had no faith. I didn't believe in a higher power of some sort. And so, of course, I needed to control everything because nothing was supporting me. And I can remember one of the first times I meditated, and I was like in this really great experience of bliss. I could feel it in my body. And all I could think was, if this is death, I'm okay with this. And that's when things really started to change for me because I think I started to actually surrender to something bigger. And when you allow yourself to surrender, there's infinite possibility. But I never even allowed myself to experience it because anxiety consumed me so much that the wrath of my control was so tight that surrendering was like death to me. And how many people in this world are living in control?
I recently have been working on learning how to let go because I have been very much tied to control and the need to do things and be things and have things. And the more I learn to let go, the more it's so weird that the more I let go, the easier things seem. And it seems like more things just happen for the greater good or for my benefit when I don't try to control. It feels like trying to constantly control something is forcing and pushing, and you're working and constantly, where when you learn to let go, things seem to just flow and they're more harmonizing. And that's it's definitely something I've struggled with, and I've been, in the self-help industry for quite some time now, and to just recently learn to let go of the outcomes and perfectionism and everything. It's a constant struggle or mindset shift that, I have to be cognitively aware of, like, you know what? It's okay to let go. And I believe there's a lot of people out there that they don't let go. They don't know to let go. They don't know it's okay to let go. They don't know how.
Yeah. And I think that's such a key point too, Layla, that even though my anxiety manifested physically, like I said, in my body, and that's not what everyone experiences, but there is the mental space of anxiety, right? Of racing thoughts, of being in that control, sometimes to a extent of manipulation. And even my husband recently said, he used to tell me, I don't experience anxiety. And when I started healing myself, I was like, that's bullshit. Everybody experiences anxiety. Maybe it just didn't look like what I was experiencing, but everybody experiences it. And I think he didn't even know what anxiety was. He was experiencing it, but he didn't know. There was no language that he was given to understand what he was doing. Like, for instance, his was he was so scared that if things blew up in our relationship, that I would leave him. And so his form of anxiety was that worry, and he would actually manipulate things in our relationship to make sure that I wouldn't leave. And that looked like him being the caring, doting husband. Even if I was like pissed off or acting crazy, he was still like that because the fear of our relationship ending was bigger than anything for him. It ruled his life. And so it was cool to experience his side of it, because that just shows you the many different colors in which anxiety can show up. It's still controlling you, or you're trying to control something from that aspect. And then it dictates how you show up in the world. So
Yeah,
I'd be,
that's interesting. I would have
I'd be
never thought about the manifesting in different forms of worry or controlling being a part of anxieties.
yeah. I say anxiety is fear's like little brother. And if you're fearful about something, and it could be anything, even us as mothers, right? Like sometimes as mothers, we're fearful that, God forbid, you're watching the news all the time. You could be fearful about anything with your children, right? School shooting or whatnot. And then do you become neurotic about certain things because this fear has encompassed you? And maybe you're using just the school shooting thing as an example. Maybe you're hyper telling your kid that they need to make sure that they look out for this and they look out for this, which is instilling even more fear in your child, right? So it's all this layer of, let me manipulate this so I can control this so my fear won't feel as big. But if we could instill just confronting our fear, and that I love to do that in hypnosis with my clients, because we get to experience that it's not actually as bad as we think. We've made it up to be this dragon in the room. And in reality, I like to use the analogy sometimes of, imagine that you were standing at the edge of a lake and it was really dark and muddy, and somebody tells you to dive in. And you're just like, I don't know what's at the bottom of that lake. I'm not doing that. But instead, you decide to jump in feet first at the edge. And even though it looks really deep, it actually barely even covers your toes, because it's just the perception of the fear is an illusion. And when we feed it and really build its fire, it becomes this really big dream that's not actually reality. And one of my favorite books is Marianne Williamson's A Return to Love, because she talks about how fear cannot be present when you're in love. And I can honestly say, for all those years that I was in this horrible anxiety spiral, I didn't believe in love. And maybe love looks different for some people. And sometimes I say, we can use kind of the religious metaphor. What altar are you worshiping? The fear altar or the love altar? And within that umbrella, right, like fear could be judgment, it could be shame, guilt, all these different things. And even under the love one, it could be happiness, compassion, joy, ambition, inspiration. But which one are you worshiping? And to really step back and ask yourself, what's the emotion, the feeling that I've been living in primarily today?
It's a really powerful mindset shift to think about, which mindset are you feeding? Are you feeding the fear or are you feeding the love? I often in my coaching sessions I break down fears because, like you said, it's usually this big giant dragon, and then you break it down as a tiny little lizard, and how much of what is the worst case scenario broken down really isn't that bad or likely for the most part. So moving beyond that is, hey, we've identified what the worst case scenario is, what the fear is. What's the opposite of that?
Yes. So
So
powerful.
powerful.
It's funny. That you say that. It's just like a little lizard. I was watching Frozen 2 with my girls last night, and there's a piece in the movie where the little fire element is running up and down trees and putting things on fire, and everybody's very scared because they're like running from this fire. And when it comes down to it, it's just this tiny little lizard. And it's so cute. And when we like stop and actually give it attention and give it energy, it actually can cool down and settle. And that's such a great metaphor too, to even what going back to you were saying about the messages in our body, right? We're constantly getting taps on the shoulder or messages from our body that something needs to be addressed. And it's just the over and over and over that we ignore it and dismiss it, that it now becomes that big dragon. Versus if we would just actually listen to what it was telling us in the first place and address it, give it some energy and attention, maybe we would have the answer right there. And we wouldn't have to go down this long journey of experiencing its suffering and pain in some way.
Yeah, and I do believe that certain thoughts and feelings and emotion manifest themselves as, diseases in your body. And so when you're living in fear, it's been a practice to break down what is the fear and to think it. Fear is just your body's way of keeping you safe. And so when you think of, I'm afraid of this thing because it's new, and new is bad. Back in caveman days, if you were exploring new territory, it was dangerous. You didn't know where the tigers were. You didn't know how to stay safe. So that fear pops up anytime anything new happens or there's change, because that's in our blood, in our cellular level of safety. And so when you're like, okay, you know what? The 20th century, 21st century, we don't have to worry about the tigers. Change is good. Change is welcome. Thank you, fear, for being there and for trying to keep me safe. I release you with love. I embrace you, and I move forward. And taking ownership of those emotions and taking charge of your body and your thoughts, when you appreciate it and you love it and you let it go, it doesn't manifest into diseases and ailments in your body. Not only are you healthier physically, but also mentally and emotionally too.
Absolutely. And that's such a great point. This idea of living in survival and with the tigers, chasing the antelopes or whatever it might be. When that antelope gets away, it naturally knows how to go back to grazing. And if we are the antelope, what is the tiger for us that's actually creating survival? For me, it was the anxiety, it was the thoughts in my head. Yes, maybe we're not in primal times anymore, but that tiger was alive for me every single day. And for some people, maybe that's a partner, you're in a abusive relationship. Maybe it's the person that works next to you at work. Maybe it's your boss, maybe it's your mother. So many things. And while that concept is ancient, we've now programmed ourselves to be in this constant state of survival. And going all of those years, experiencing the level of fear and anxiety that I had experienced, no wonder I had created hypothyroidism in my body. No wonder I had created PCOS in my body. I was living in constant survival. My body didn't know how to rest. and repair. And if we aren't giving ourselves space to do that, and, I think people think about self-care and they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna go get my nails done or go to the salon or do things like that," which not to say that those aren't self-care options, but are you actually allowing yourself to fully decompress and to be in that state of rest and repair, changing your nervous system so that you can be someone different? We need that time.
Yeah, I did a whole episode on self-care and how it's not just bubble baths and getting your hair done. It's really about setting healthy boundaries and taking time to decompress and rewiring your nervous system for safety and peace and not being in a constant fight, flight, or freeze mode. It's about being able to breathe and be at peace. And so many people are stuck in survival mode that being at peace feels unnatural and scary and foreign and almost like they have to retrain their body that it's okay to just be.
Yeah, and being in a world where not only do we have instant gratification, but by our phones, right? The Whether it's searching something on Google or scrolling on Instagram or Pinterest or Facebook or whatever it might be, TikTok. I my girls, they love to turn on Spotify and then listen to music, and within Spotify they can look at the lyrics and they can memorize the lyrics through the song. And I tell them, like, you don't that's not the only way that you can memorize lyrics. And it drives me crazy that they have to hold this thing in their phone while listening to the song, like in the car. And I'm like, just put the phone down and use your ear. You're training yourself that you need to be in front of this screen 24/7, even if it's just looking at the lyrics on the song, because you're doing it to every single song. And so with that, I try to create dedicated no screen zone after like 8:30 at our house. And that's for adults too, just because we have to train our bodies how to get back into that rest and relaxation state, especially before bed.
So you went from being a hypochondriac with constant panic attacks, unable to live your own life, and do basic functions as a mother, as a spouse, to advocating for yourself, learning hypnosis, learning how to meditate, facilitating meditations for other people. What do you think your biggest takeaway is from your journey?
I think my biggest takeaway is number one, that I'm not alone. I don't have to do it alone. Trusting in something bigger than myself, that when things are hard, it will catch me. I think so much of my energy was this like kind of bulldog energy of I have to do all the things, I have to take control, I have to put up these walls around so that people can't hurt me or things like that. And I think also remembering that people are innately good. So much of my fear revolved around this idea that if I was having a panic attack and I was alone, whether it was on the road or in a parking garage, that no one would come support me and help me. And so I think I really instilled that faith that people are innately good and they will show up for you when you need it, and
That's
to
beautiful.
trust yourself. Yeah. And you're not your diagnosis, that the identity that we become, that I thought I was this girl with this anxiety, with these sicknesses, that was an identity I had created. But again, in creating it, I could actually create something different.
I see a lot of people attach themselves to their diagnosis, and I'm learning NLP, and I love how the words that you say and use have such a deeper psychological meaning. When you say, I have anxiety, I'm having a panic attack. It could just be you disassociate yourself from that. I have experienced anxiety as opposed to owning that. Those words have such power when you just differentiate yourself. Like instead of saying, I have depression, it is, I have experienced bouts of depression. And it's just slightly moving it just a little further away from you does such a world of difference because you're not your diagnosis. You don't have to marry yourself to that. That doesn't have to dictate who you are or how you interact. It could be just a thing.
Right. Beautiful.
Said a lot of very, very powerful things here today. Very helpful. Is there anything that you want to share that maybe I didn't ask or we didn't cover today?
I think we covered a lot. Yeah, I'm always here. Like I said, in reality, whether it's anxiety, depression, racing thoughts, there is a chemical emotional addiction that's happening, and it can be stopped. You have to be willing to show up and do it. But whatever cycle and spiral that continues to be in, you can take your power back. And if you can't do it alone, there are people like me and Layla that can help you and support you. And so make a choice to stop suffering and to reclaim your power.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for all of your inspirational words, your amazingly vulnerable story and triumphant story. Do you want to let my listeners know how they can get a hold of you? I will link everything in the show notes below, but just to reiterate.
Sure, sure. You can check me out at my website, thegrowthgoddess.net. I hang out on Instagram sometimes at the.growth.goddess. And you can always find me hanging out on the podcast, The Uncharted Way. I've just recently released some solo episodes that are just me literally talking about the process of anxiety and how to stop it in its tracks. Plus, I have some wonderful guest interviews and stories as well, which hopefully Layla will come be a guest soon as well.
Yes, I have some things in the work I can't wait to share with you and your listeners, and I might let mine know too.
Sweet. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Let's go do life authentically.
Yes.
Yes.